If you missed out on the Woody Marks hype train, today I'm bringing you 10 plus must stash players at the end of your bench because we have been talking about Woody Marks since week 1 of fantasy football. And so I want you guys to make sure that you get these guys on the end of your bench so you don't have to fight waivers and or you don't miss the pop-off that just happened with Woody Marks, because it seems like the fantasy football community is getting smarter and smarter and smarter about their waivers, and the waivers are a little bit more desolate. You got to be stashing these guys ahead of time. We started off with stash number 1, and this is going to be Brashard Smith for the Kansas City Chiefs. When we're talking about this Kansas City Chiefs running attack, we got Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt. Both those guys look like they have zero burst left. They're kind of just plotters at this point. And Andy Reid said, hey, Brashard Smith is going to be in line to be getting more work. We see in this week 4 game versus Baltimore, it went up from an 11% snap share in week 3 up to a 26% snap share in week 4. And we put up 6.6 fantasy points in full PPR. Now, Brashard Smith was a converted wide receiver to running back in college, so he definitely has that pass catching ability. The way that I look at Brashard Smith heading forward is we got to look at him like the Jerick McKinnon of this Kansas City Chiefs offense, which to some may not be like a high-end Woody Marks type of stash, but Jerick McKinnon, let's not forget, put up top 20 weeks back in the day when he was absolutely popping off for the Kansas City Chiefs. So if I want a running back, if I want a guy that has high level upside, then I want to be targeting a guy in this Kansas City Chiefs offense, because we do know Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes can get that running back involved. And if you like fantasy football, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, as we are on the way to 2,000 subscribers here on the 4 for 4 Fantasy Football YouTube channel. We're answering all the start state questions down below as well. So make sure you leave us a question, leave us a like. We appreciate it. My second player that you need to be stashing heading into week 5 fantasy football, it is going to be Ollie Gordon for the Miami Dolphins. And Ollie Gordon, I continue to have on this video because I believe in not only him, but this situation. We see Tyreek Hill have that unfortunate injury in week 4 versus the Jets. And this is only going to mean that the Dolphins are going to have to be able to find offense somewhere. I know a lot of people are excited about Darren Waller. A lot of people are excited for Jalen Waddle to take that next step. Of course, you got Devon Achane in the backfield, but Ollie Gordon is somebody that, as much as he's been getting that 25 to 26% snap share, I think they're going to have to rely a little bit more on this running game, even though the offensive line has been absolutely beat up for the Miami Dolphins. I just think the Carolina Panthers in week 5, this is a great matchup. We got the Chargers in week 6, Cleveland in week 7, Atlanta in week 8. It's a decent stretch of games where they're going to have to be putting up points. And so I just want to get some of these guys. I'm not saying that the Miami Dolphins offenses look good, because it really hasn't looked good at all this season, but I do want a piece of Ollie Gordon. Like I said, as much as we didn't think the Texans were a great offense for Woody Marks, if something were to happen to Devon Achane, which knock on wood, I'm not praying for because I have plenty of Devon Achane shares, I just would think Ollie Gordon definitely has that uptick, and he is 37% rostered on Sleeper, so there's a chance that he might not be available in your league right now, but I want to make sure that I am getting Ollie Gordon stashed. Now, my third stash heading into week 5 fantasy football is going to be Jalen Coker, and I've been talking about him in every stash video. He's on IR. He's on IR. So if you have a free IR spot, which I know injuries are absolutely rampant right now, maybe you don't, but I do want Jalen Coker stashed because Jalen Coker should be returning here in the next 2 weeks. He's actually week to week is what Dave Canales said currently this week. But if we look back into 2024, he had some games in week 5 last season, put up 10.8 fantasy points, 17.8 fantasy points in week 8. Dude was absolutely electric. And then when we talk about heading into the playoff time, week 15 put up 21 fantasy points versus Dallas. So especially in an offense that is lacking a slot wide receiver, they literally traded away Adam Thielen, hoping Jalen Coker could be that guy, and then Jalen Coker went to IR. I just continue to think with him only being 14% rostered, you need to be adding Jalen Coker onto your team because he's absolutely electric and somebody that I want to be targeting everywhere I go. Now, my next stash is going to be Isaiah Bond for the Cleveland Browns. And let us look at Isaiah Bond, who came out in week 4 and put up 8.8 fantasy points in full PPR with a 65% snap share without Cedric Tillman. Now, Isaiah Bond over on Sleeper is only 23% rostered. And I think if you need some wide receiver help, which a lot of us do with all of these wide receivers underperforming and or injuries, is going up and picking Isaiah Bond up, because we see that Isaiah Bond, if you look at him from his prospect profile, because he is a rookie coming into the NFL, if it weren't for some of those off the field things, Isaiah Bond probably would have been a 4th, 3rd, 5th round level rookie draft pick. But since he did have those off the field stuff, went undrafted, but the talent is 100% there for Isaiah Bond. with his college production profile. And I think if we're looking at him kind of taking over this wide receiver 2 spot with Cedric Tillman being out for the next few weeks, I'm excited for it. Now, Dylan Gabriel walking into being the starting quarterback, we'll have to see how this passing attack actually looks, but I actually think that benefits Isaiah Bond because I'm a little bit worried that this offense is not going to be good. I mean, it wasn't really good with Joe Flacco. I don't think it's going to be good with Dylan Gabriel, but that's going to put them in game scripts where they're going to have to throw the ball in the second half. And so give me some Isaiah Bond, who had a 55% snap share, 6 targets, 3 receptions, 58 yards. Go pick up some Isaiah Bond in your fantasy football leagues today. Now, before we get into my next stash, like I kind of was alluding to a little bit earlier, right now the fantasy football community, the way that the waiver wire has been happening where, hey, Trey Benson, make sure you go target Trey Benson. Make sure you go target Woody Marks. Like, those guys have not been on waivers, even though sometimes here in the fantasy football community, like when we're making waiver wire videos, we recommend those for maybe some leagues where those guys weren't available. But you got to be getting on these running backs a week, 2 weeks earlier, and just hope and pray that when that situation arises that you already have them on your roster. Because right now, if you don't get to them now, then you're probably going to miss out on the waiver wire. So that's why this next guy, like I said, my 4th stash for this week, it is going to be Kyle Monongai for the Bears. And when we're talking about good old Kyle, he continues to not necessarily put up the fantasy football points that we have hoped for this part of the season, but the snap share has gone up since week 1. He had a 41% snap share in week 2, 29% snap share in week 3, and then a 28% snap share in week 4. Now they are on a bye. So if you wanted to potentially wait until, waivers run next week, I could understand if you are super tight on a roster spot. But Ben Johnson has said that they want to get Kyle Monongai more involved heading into week 6, into week 7 fantasy football. Let's not forget, it's playing pretty much right behind DeAndre Swift, who has been very efficient in his own right. I just think Kyle Monongai is the grinder that we kind of want in this overall offense, the guy that has the touchdown upside when it comes to the goal line. And so definitely if you can go get Kyle Monongai, that's who I'd want. Now, I'm taking Brashard Smith. I'm taking Ollie Gordon. I'm taking Blake Corum if I need a running back all ahead of Kyle Monongai. But I do think Kyle Monongai is a great stash heading into week 5 fantasy football. And if you can potentially wait a little bit longer since he might be out there on waivers, then 100% do that because he is only 12% rostered. Now, moving on to my 6th stash. This is going to be Mason Taylor for the Jets. And Mason Taylor showed out in this game versus Miami with 11.5 fantasy points, an 81% snap share, had 7 targets, 5 receptions for 65 yards. He is only 17% rostered. Mason Taylor was a 2nd-round tight end drafted to the Jets. And the beautiful thing about when we were talking about Mason Taylor this offseason, even though we were like, hey, Justin Fields, we don't know what his passing volume, his passing efficiency is going to look like, was, hey, it's pretty much Garrett Wilson, and then Mason Taylor can kind of step in to this number 2 receiving role behind Garrett Wilson. And that's kind of what we saw in this game versus Miami in week 4. Now, we get a great matchup against Dallas in week 5 and Denver in week 6. And Denver, they're going to have Patrick Surtain out there on Garrett Wilson in week 6. And so I just think Mason Taylor is getting to a point where if Mason Taylor can kind of cement himself as this number 2 pass catching option next to Garrett Wilson, I think Mason Taylor could be very valuable, especially when you're looking at a tight end landscape right now, where if you don't have a top 3 or 4 tight end, you're feeling kind of frisky, I would say, week in and week out. Now, Mason Taylor was limited on Wednesday, so we're going to kind of have to continue to monitor that practice status. Like I said, recording this on Thursday afternoon. It's coming out on Saturday. And so I just like some Mason Taylor. I think there's value in him. Now, I don't necessarily always love to hold 2 tight ends on my roster because I like to stash, a running back or a wide receiver. But let's say that you're absolutely loaded at running back and wide receiver. You haven't had any of these injuries affect you, then 100%. Mason Taylor would be somebody that I'm currently trying to stash because I do think there is a ton of value in Mason Taylor. My next player that you need to be stashing heading into week 5 fantasy football, it's going to be Jayden Higgins for the Houston Texans. And right now he's only rostered in 31% of leagues. And this Houston Texans offense has struggled. He has struggled in his 43 to 44% of snaps that he's been on the field, but he logged his first touchdown in week 4 versus Tennessee, caught that 1 reception for 24 yards, 1 touchdown for 9.4 fantasy points. But besides that, he's really only had about 2 to 3 targets a game. It hasn't been great, but let's not forget Jayden Higgins was drafted in the 2nd round to the Houston Texans. They saw something in him. They want to get him involved. A lot of comparisons with him being 6'4", 215 to like a T. Higgins. Now, the thing that we typically start to see with some of these rookie-level wide receivers historically is that after their bye week, they start to perform a little bit better. So that's typically week 7, week 8, week 9, week 10, week 11. That's when we're really shooting for that upside there with these rookie level wide receivers. Now, of course, you have your Emeka Bukas, you have your Justin Jeffersons, all great and dandy. But Jayden Higgins, their bye is week 6. Week 7 is going to be Seattle. So maybe you don't add Jayden Higgins now. But going up against Baltimore, I'm assuming that the Houston Texans, as much as it's crazy to say, going up against Baltimore with no Lamar Jackson, they should be in a pretty good command to score a ton of points, because I don't think the Baltimore Ravens offense is going to do much without Lamar Jackson. And so I think you pick up Jayden Higgins right now, especially if some of these earlier guys are already added, if you're playing in a little bit deeper of a league, because I think coming down the stretch, especially like week 7, week 8, week 9, we could be looking at an absolute resurgence, an absolute breakout for Jayden Higgins in your fantasy football lineups. My next player you need to be stashing, and like I said, this is probably a deeper one, so deep league, is going to still be Oronde Gadsden for the Los Angeles Chargers, tight end, and 9.6 fantasy points in week 3, and then in week 4, if you picked him up, only put up 3.6 fantasy points. Even though he had more of a snap share, he just had less targets. There's a ton of mouths to feed in this Chargers offense, and we all know that, because if you have Ladd McConkey, it's been an absolutely crazy, sad season for Ladd McConkey, with great things for QJ, great things for Keenan Allen, great things for Hampton. But I do think there is some value, especially with some of the matchups coming up. We got Washington in week 5, week 6 versus Miami. They're definitely going to trounce Miami. But then you got Indianapolis in week 7 going up against the Minnesota defense in week 8. So there are some matchups where you could see maybe a little bit more of a closer game script, where I know they're passing the ball in a top 5 efficiency in the league, but just continue to have some of the more of those close matchups against tough defenses where maybe they're covering Keenan Allen and they're covering QJ just a little bit better, and Oronde can get free. I definitely think this is a deeper stash. Like I said, everyone else prior to this in this video, I would prefer to stash over Gadsden, but I do think he is worthy of a stash. Last week, we started talking about some defenses that you want to be streaming, and so today I'll bring you 2 more defenses that you should be stashing, especially if you have the roster space heading into week 6 fantasy football. Now, I will say this about the defenses next week. There are some terrible matchups, and the good matchups are pretty much already defenses that are owned. Like the Green Bay Packers are going up against Cincinnati. Green Bay Packers are not out there on waivers. Pittsburgh Steelers are already going up against Cleveland. Philadelphia Eagles going up against the Giants. Chargers versus Miami, and the Buffalo Bills versus Atlanta. And so personally for me, none of those defenses are kind of rosterable stashes, but the Raiders are going up against the Tennessee Titans. Cam Ward and those boys have absolutely been struggling to move the ball. And so I definitely think it is worthy of adding the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, we haven't seen them have any sort of fantasy football success in fantasy since week 1 versus New England, but I do think they are a good defense to have, because I think the over-under, like I said, we're going to have to get those official kind of game metrics, game stats, the over-under from Vegas, but I assume it's going to be super small point totals that are projected. And then in the same vein, I think you could target the Tennessee Titans defense. Now, I don't love them going up against the Raiders, because you got Brock Bowers hopefully getting a little bit more healthy. We just saw Genty, Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers, but I think them as a whole, they have, Geno Smith has been prone to throw some interceptions this year. So if you're playing in a defensive setting where you can, of course, you're getting a ton of points for interceptions, I definitely think the Tennessee Titans could be good as well. So I prefer the Raiders, but the Tennessee Titans would be my second defense to stash if I cannot get the Raiders. But I appreciate you guys tuning in this video. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button, as we are on the way to 2,000 subscribers, answering all start sit questions down below. So I appreciate you guys for tuning in this video, and I'll catch you on the next one.